The American modern right-wing movement also is very good at universalizing their outwardly awful policies. They never say, we are here to defend big businesses. They say, small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. We're here to support small businesses. When in fact, their policy agenda is greatly beneficial for big businesses. I want to dial in specifically on here. Let's look at the United States comparisons on how this.
In the United States, the middle class has played a central role since its very inception. America is often referred to as a nation of small businesses, and small business is a big part of American ideology, often standing in as a symbol of individual freedom and independence. Thomas Jefferson's ideal citizen was the self-sufficient and independent landowning farmer, an ideal that retained its appeal even as it soon became obsolete in the face of expanding markets. And during the Cold War, small business owners and their ideals in both urban and rural areas were used as a bulwark against the spread of communism. To this day, small businesses play a very significant role in America's self-understanding and are generally viewed very positively.
One day I want to own my own business, be my own boss. Probably nothing embodies the essence of the American dream more than that thought.
There's a lot of idealization and romanticism surrounding small business, both on the right and the left. Small businesses are seen as personal, relatable, and admirable. In a 2017 poll, 70% of Americans said they have a great deal or a lot of confidence in small businesses. And I get it. In our world, small businesses bring a lot of local color to many places and allow for products and experiences that you couldn't get anywhere else. But we shouldn't let such romanticism blind us to the many problems that small businesses often come with, because they are still businesses in the end, and that means profit is their primary motive. In the United States, small businesses on average pay lower wages, provide worse benefits, are exempt from crucial labor protections, and due to their small size tend to make unionization difficult, which tends to leave small business employees with little to no bargaining power. In the US, federal law requires businesses to provide medical coverage after discharge only if they have 20 or more employees, and family and medical leave only if they have 50 or more employees, thus exempting many small businesses. And anti-discrimination laws, whether against race or gender, only apply if you employ 15 or more people, all of which often allows small business owners to be petty tyrants towards those they employ, and they will sometimes use their status as small business owners to justify overworking and underpaying people. Whether small or big, businesses compete in the same market, in which success requires ruthlessness. And to this day, the American petty bourgeoisie have a significant effect on the divisions between the political left and the right.
If you want to make America a better place for everyone, especially for minorities, forget social activism. Instead, start a business.
They not only provide opposition to labor-oriented reforms, they also have served as the mass base for today's right-wing populism, which, as we shall see, reveals several of the same class patterns that we saw in German fascism. Consider the Trump campaign and the MAGA movement. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to discuss whether it is fascist or not, but it is today's leading form of right-wing populism in America. The media often describes MAGA as a movement of the white working class, and while its ranks do include many white workers, I think this label overlooks the movement's middle-class character. Data from primaries in 2016, for instance, show that much of Trump's support came from middle-income voters, whose average earnings were a lot higher than those of the average American. And while income should not be equated with class, it does serve as some preliminary indication. But as a way of zooming into the class dynamics at play, I'd like to focus on the January 6th Capitol riot, as it's a particularly extreme expression of the MAGA movement. And just as we'd expect, the petty bourgeoisie, namely small business owners and the self-employed, were overrepresented among the Capitol rioters. There was a floral shop owner, a CEO of a skydiving company, owner of a chiropractor practice, owner and president of a tax guidance company, owners of real estate companies, owner of a car dealership, self-employed insurance agent, CEO of a data analytics marketing firm, and I could go on and on. This social group was much more likely to be found among the Capitol rioters than among the general voting population, and were even more overrepresented among those Capitol rioters who were violent. Trust me, once you recognize this trend, you never stop noticing it. While blue-collar workers were present, white-collar workers were a lot more common, and were also likely to be relatively high-ranking managers, who some categorize as petty bourgeois as well, because
Yeah, so this is what I talked about a lot. This was an HVAC business owner riot, right? Like, that's what it was for the most part.
of their increased status and the power they have over subordinate employees. So it's completely misleading to see this event as a representation of the white working class, let alone the general working class. After all, the rioters came from all over the United States, which means that these were people who were well off enough and had enough economic power to take time off work, pay for traveling expenses, whether by bus or plane, as well as a hotel to stay in, just to attend a Trump rally, which is already some indication of its class character. These were people who were drawn to the MAGA movement because they identified their individual freedom with the freedom of business, and saw all government efforts to help and assist the working class and the unemployed as obstructions to their personal success, explaining their common resentment towards welfare recipients, for instance.
Because owning your own business represents freedom. You are independent. You are free. And that's exactly the reason big government despises.
The American modern right-wing movement also is very good at universalizing their outwardly awful policies. They never say, we are here to defend big businesses. They say, small businesses are the backbone of the American economy. We're here to support small businesses. When in fact, their policy agenda is greatly beneficial for big businesses. Okay? That's why when Republicans talk about tax cuts, they always talk about tax cuts for the middle class. We're going to do tax cuts for the middle class. We are going to help out the middle class. Deregulation is going to help out the middle class, small businesses. That is a lie. What their open goal, and as Trump demonstrated in his 2017 tax cuts, is to cut taxes for the wealthiest in American society and the corporations, to cut the corporate tax rate. There's a reason why in the Trump tax cuts that came in the last Trump regime, the tax cuts made for the top earners in this country and the corporate tax rate were actually permanent, whereas tax cuts for the middle class and everything under the top marginal tax rate was actually slated to sunset. All of those tax cuts are supposed to sunset in 2026, I believe. Just so you understand, that's not what the video is saying. I don't care what the video is saying. I'm giving additional context to the way in which America propagandizes American politicians and American political movements oftentimes propagandize certain positions that are inherently harmful to the middle class, which is a very specific designation that is supposed to take you away from understanding the class dynamic from worker and capital owner to begin with. Okay. But it's just something you need to understand. Both parties are also capitalists. Both parties also represent the interests of corporations. That's precisely the reason why the Democratic Party is directly at odds with its base of support.
Despises small business.
And yet, at the same time, as we saw with German fascism, this also comes with attacks on big capitalists, often represented by people like George Soros and Bill Gates, which often comes along with various conspiracy theories that don't stray far from anti-Semitism. Conspiracy theories about the collusion of left-wing protesters and labor unions with powerful elites like George Soros. That very same flavor of middle-class paranoia, a phenomenon that is difficult to make sense of if we don't recognize its petty bourgeois character. This also helps us understand America's right libertarians, who otherwise also seem hopelessly contradictory. Why is it that so many of them, who are supposed to be anti-government, end up moving towards fascism? Once again, the right libertarian movement is populated with a lot of petty bourgeois individuals who identify their freedom with unregulated business activity and attack the government for its obstruction of this freedom. And yet, whenever their business begins being threatened either by the demands of organized labor or simply by the ruthless tendencies of the market, they end up wishing for a strong government which would wield its iron fist in protecting their business against these threats. Recognizing it also helps us immensely in making sense of different responses to the COVID pandemic. Among the anti-lockdown protesters, the kind who equated social distancing with communism, the petty bourgeoisie were, you guessed it, overrepresented. In Minnesota, as one example,
the subtle line appealing to middle-class frustrations is the standard of living for what we think is middle class is only achievable for small business owners. Both parties never appeal to the working class, but only an amorphous, intangible middle class that hasn't existed for decades. Exactly. There is no real, straightforward worker. I guess there is to a certain degree. It's like the professional managerial class. Okay. There, to a certain degree, the professional managerial class, is a part of that equation. We're talking about, we're talking about people with college degrees and whatnot. The Democratic Party captures the attention of that base. The Republican Party, on the other hand, captures the attention of the small business owners who actually receive what it looks like to be that mythical middle class. But ultimately, the notion of a group of individuals that like work in a fucking factory and have a house and have a comfortable, meaningful existence with a single income, like single income households with one person working as a wage laborer and being firmly in this like middle class standard is non-existent in this country.
Those pleading to reopen the state during the pandemic were overwhelmingly small business owners, proprietors of hair salons, massage parlors, a bowling alley, vacation rental, etc., who put up slogans such as "small business is essential." And this makes sense as the lockdown was impeding the profitability of their businesses, in some cases to the point of bankruptcy. Also, in some cases, impeding their ability to spend their disposable income. Some protesters, for instance, expressed their dissatisfaction with the lockdown on account of not being able to get a haircut or not being able to go to a golf course, which is not a particularly working-class concern. The fact that the lockdown was indeed threatening many small businesses incentivized the spread of various conspiracy theories, again expressing that middle-class paranoia, claiming that the virus was man-made or that it did not exist at all and was simply a tactic to push America towards communism. The working class also had a strong response to the pandemic, which came with an increase in worker strikes, and their demands could not be more different from those of the petty bourgeoisie. The striking workers, who were very well aware of the dangers of the pandemic and were at high risk of infection, demanded not only improved working conditions, but improved safety measures, improved access to safety equipment, and increased precautions against the spread of COVID. Nothing could show more clearly just how important it is to differentiate.
And there are far more of these people, albeit their organizational capacity is infinitely more limited because they do not have the freedom that like a small business owner has. But there are far more of these people out there, working class people, wage laborers, than there are small business owners, okay?
Differentiate between the working class and the petty bourgeoisie if we want to understand the nature of different political movements and actions. This is not to say that some small business owners did not have legitimate concerns. The US government definitely did not act quickly and sufficiently enough to help those whose livelihoods were severely threatened by the lockdown. One legitimate concern was the fact that given America's privatized healthcare system, many small business owners depend on the profitability of their business in order to pay for health insurance for themselves and their family. The fight for universal healthcare is an example of an issue over which the workers and the lower middle class could potentially unite. Now, while we do see these very clear patterns in the relationship between class and politics, it is also true that today people vote according to their class a lot less than they did 100 years ago. Yeah. And many of today's political divisions are drawn along lines of race.
Are YouTubers small business owners? Yes, absolutely. Yes. Technically, myself included. It's an owned and operated business. So I still get paid for my labor and not for making others work for me. I don't own like a channel overall where like other people are working under me and working like there is no way that I can continue making money if I just stopped streaming. Okay. But yes, technically YouTubers, especially many other YouTubers that have like, you know, ginormous fucking businesses do this. Like they are firmly within the small business owner category.
Gender and culture. And that is something that was actively and purposefully achieved by the ruling class, which has always tried to produce internal splits within the working class and to bring workers over to its side using cultural issues, a tactic which in recent decades was especially pioneered by Republicans. And this is a problem because it points to a lack of class consciousness among workers, which leads them to lash out against fellow workers.
What do you mean? Plenty of ways for you to make money if you don't stream? Yes, of course. But most of them, like there are a million different ways that I can continue earning money off of the pre-existing the capital that I have. Capital accumulation is an avenue for me. Okay. Yes, but that would change the dynamic of the way I earn currently. That would turn me into a capitalist rather than someone who still has to work to earn his income. A lot of people misunderstand how this dynamic works, and they think, for example, Athletes, very wealthy, right? They get these massive contracts, right? So they go, excuse me, athletes are bourgeoisie, okay? And many of them are, but not in the way that you think they are, okay? Athletes' massive contracts that they get from the sports franchises they work for is still very much wage labor, okay? A lot of them then take those contracts and turn around and start their own businesses in which they become capital owners, business owners, and therefore capitalists. Okay. LeBron James's endorsements and also his wages that he gets from the Los Angeles Lakers puts him in a wage laborer category. Okay. Whereas LeBron James's many investments into other businesses puts him in a capitalist category. That is how this works.
Workers, rather than those who actually exploit them. This is not to say that the Democrat Party is free from blame either, as it has been consistently disappointing the poor and working class for decades, and has been thereby leaving people feeling like there is no worthwhile alternative. The decline of class consciousness has been further intensified by what I would call the petty bourgeoisification of the working class, the attempt to disarm class struggle by making workers identify more with the petty bourgeoisie than their own class. This is seen when working class people see themselves as temporarily unsuccessful business people rather than workers, entrepreneurs on the grind rather than sellers of labor power, and this is exploited by various companies. Consider, for instance, Uber, which has utilized the slogan, "Be your own boss." Although Uber drivers are gig workers who are materially generating profit for Uber, Uber tries to convince them that they are in fact self-employed bosses. Thus, while offering them terrible working conditions, they sell them the promise of being petty bourgeois. And all of these problems are further confounded by a lack of genuinely working-class organizations, ones that would build working-class autonomy. And history shows us that few things are as effective in combating fascism as organized labor. And now I'd like to thank my patrons, who fund my petty bourgeois existence. 404 error, just undo it.
Is a good example landlords? Yes, landlords would be passive earners. Passive income means you do not have to go out and directly work to get a wage, okay? You do not have to go out and work to get a wage from someone else who is paying you. Passive versus active income.